think we might start. It's just a minute past 6 o'clock. And I know that for many, it's a Sunday evening here in Australia. And I really want to thank you to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm calling in from today. And that's the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Bunurong peoples of the East Kulin Nations. And if you would like to mention or acknowledge the land on which you're calling in from, feel free to pop that into the chat. And I also know that as fellow NIF supporters, we all yearn for a day where in Israel-Palestine, Israelis and Palestinians can also recognize each other's shared history and belonging to the land on which they live. And I hope we can see some similar acknowledgement of countries in the future. My name's Kate Rosenberg. For those of you who may not know me, I am the new Executive Director of the NIF Israel Fund in Australia. It's a really exciting and terrifying couple of weeks to join the organisation. But many of you may know that I'm no stranger to the NIF Israel Fund, neither in Israel or here in Australia. I lived and worked in Israel for about 10 years and worked with many of the grantees of the NIF Israel Fund, and returned to Australia about 8 years ago now, where I had the honour of stepping onto the board here at the NIF Israel Fund. Recently, I've taken on the role of the executive director, and I really couldn't feel more proud or honoured to be leading this organisation here in Australia during these really difficult, complicated, and threatening at times the period of time. And I look forward to meeting many of you in the near future. When we were thinking about the event tonight, we were really responding to the situation between Israel and Iran, and we could not have anticipated how fast the situation could have moved. And maybe some of the questions that we were thinking about a week ago are very different to what's happening on the ground now. And I don't know about you, but if you're like me, you were watching and listening to a lot of different geopolitical analyses on podcasts, radio, and online. And they were all fantastic to learn and hear about what different actors were saying. But what was really missing for me, and what we really wanted to bring to you tonight, was the perspective of our grantees on the ground in Israel, and to hear from our colleagues at the NIF Israel Fund in Israel as to, first of all, how they personally have been doing, and secondly, how the NIF Israel Fund has responded during these very complicated last few weeks. I think I'll jump right in at this point and hand it over to our two excellent speakers and two of my colleagues. First of all, we have Shira Ben Sasson Furstenberg on the line, who is the Associate Director at NIF Israel. She's been with the organisation for many, many years and lives just around the corner to where I used to live in Jerusalem as well. And before she joined the NIF Israel Fund, she has worked at places such as the Jewish Pluralism Watch and at the Knesset Research and Information Centre. And I'm also really glad to be joined by Sana Ibn Bari, who is the Grants Manager for the Negev and Gender programs at NIF Israel. She's a lawyer, and she's worked at many of the organisations that you probably have heard of because they're supported by the NIF Israel Fund across Israel, including ACRI and Iftach Maki. And we're just really glad that she is now part of the NIF Israel Fund team in Israel. So if I can hand it over to you two, you could start first. Can you maybe introduce yourself in a more warm way than me reading from your biography, and tell us how you spent the last few weeks coping with what is now maybe perhaps known as the 12-day war, and just introduce yourself to our some of our supporters here in Australia.
So good morning from Jerusalem. It's hard to talk to you. I don't see you, but I think you're here, friends of and the community of NIF in Australia. Good evening to you. And I want to start by saying that I was going to congratulate you on your new director of NIF in Australia. And I was looking at this Hebrew word that we use quite a lot. It's a very common Hebrew word that you say to someone when they have a new haircut, or when they have a new job, or when they have a new baby, or when they have a new shirt. You really say it in different situations. We say titchachu, titchachi. And I wanted to say to the NIF community in Australia, titchachu, you have a new wonderful director. And then I said, what kind of word? That doesn't even translate into English. It means be new, or enjoy your new thing, or something, or like become renewed. When we say to someone, and it really can be for something big and small. So in preparation for this call, I went to look for the origin of the term titchachu, be new, or enjoy your new addition to your leadership. And I learned that it started as a greeting in Hebrew in the 13th century. So it's a very interesting article. It was written in Haaretz a few, like 5 or 6 years ago. And if people are fascinated by the Hebrew language, which is totally not what we're going to do today, I very much recommend it. I'm happy to circulate it. All of this is to say that we're really happy that Kate is joining as a staff member and a leader in NIF Australia. It gives us in Israel a really strong feeling of professionalism and direction for the work that you're doing as a community in Australia to support the social change work that we're trying to lead on the ground here in Israel. So welcome, Kate. And it's great to partner with you on this first event together for the NIF Australia community. This is not what you asked me to say, but I'm excited to be here with you.
Thank you. Thanks for your kind words. Thank you.
And then to answer your question, what can I tell you? We don't know how to feel. You know, we're perplexed by the times that we're living through. If we were talking a week and less than a week ago, a few days ago, you'd still have us in the London Blitz mode, where our colleagues and friends are sleeping in the Tel Aviv train station, not running to the Tel Aviv train stations, but actually starting their nights there and sleeping there, and in underground parking lots, and all of us envying each other if we have a safe room in the apartment, or if we have a shelter, a bomb shelter in the building. And I am lucky to have a bomb shelter in my building, 4 stories down, to share with 50 or 60 other people and their dogs and their babies. But you know what? I felt privileged about that, because I have running water, and because I have you know, access to health services and to internet. And some people, Jewish and Palestinian in Israel, don't have any of that. And some people, Palestinian outside of Israel, have much, much, much less than that. So even during these past 12 days, what can I say? I felt privileged to be in a place where I have personally everything I need, where my family, most of it, is in a safe place, and where I am positioned. And this is probably the highest privilege, where I'm positioned in a place where I can offer help, as this role in the New Israel Fund, where you can really decide. You have the honor and the responsibility to decide about the way we can help all those people who really need our help in the immediate term and for the long term.
I'm going to come back and ask you how you decided how to help, especially in those initial days. But first, I'd love to hear from Sana about her experience in the past few weeks.
Um, Good evening, everybody. So I'm Sana Ibn Bari. I'm a grant manager in NIF, and I'm talking to you currently from Haifa, where I live, but I'm originally from the south. I belong to the Bedouin community, and as Kate has introduced, I've worked for many years with the unrecognized villages in the south. So that is the aspect of work I come from mainly. I think we are all a bit confused, a bit shaken by the last 12 to 2 weeks almost, and the way the war started and the way it ended, I think, left us quite confused and shocked. And I think a lot of things are intertwined between the personal aspect and the professional aspect. From one hand, we are in a position, as Shira said, to really help in these dire times and really put all of our resources and efforts into communities that are mostly being vulnerable during the times of war. But on the other hand, we also have to deal on ourselves with all the aspect that comes with the war to find a shelter, to protect yourself. And I think there's much more to it than physical protection. It's also an emotional protection. I think this war has also revealed a new form of dynamics and racism that happens within the shelter that NIF and many organizations have alerted from. And that is the expulsion of people from shelters and racist behavior towards people that want to protect themselves, being from the street or being from the same neighborhood, from the next building to, and also the dynamics that comes with being with so many people in a shelter, maybe talking about war, maybe talking about political positions, maybe talking about personal stands towards this war. So I think it mixed a lot of things in this period of time, and we are just trying to collect ourselves, because also the coming back to reality and coming back to life was very rapid, in terms of we did not have the time to, as a collective, as a society, to register what we have went through in the last 2 weeks, and really to do that shift. But on a positive note, I think the work and the contribution that NIF had in this period of time has really helped me on a personal level and also on a professional level, to know that we are able to assist in such times. And maybe we'll go into details further on in the conversation.
So when the need is so acute, Sheila, how does NIF, how does an organization, let alone NIF, and then you'll describe it as how we did it, how do we respond to the needs and understand what needs to be done today, what needs to be done tomorrow, and what needed to be done yesterday? What strategies did we use to understand how to take action?
So a few years ago, we had a training for our development staff with a US expert. It was whatever, it was over Zoom, and we had a few days of training, and we brought experts on the area of resource development and community relations and everything. And we had an expert, a veteran development professional from a very mainstream funder in the United States, come and train our staff on donor messaging and all those things that we do in philanthropy. And she opened by saying that when you talk to your donor community, like we are doing today, you can frame your work and you can frame your calling to your donor community as a crisis and around the idea of a crisis. You can do that when you talk to your community, but you can do that once a decade. And I remember at the time thinking to myself, oh my God, it was even not COVID, and it was even before we had this year with 5 national election campaigns in Israel, and the first Trump administration, and the idea of annexation and everything, and intercommunal violence between Jewish and Arab residents in mixed cities, and all those things that we've been trying to respond to over the past few years. This piece of advice that this very, very professional expert from the area of resource development and community relations told us at that staff training that I still carry with me, to say, when you talk to your community, when you talk to your supporters, you can talk about crisis once a decade. It seemed off at the time, but it just became, for me, a beacon of how unrealistic sometimes the language and professional guidelines of, do's and don'ts around philanthropy and around social change work really doesn't always meet reality in a realistic way. And ever since, and in the past few years, and definitely in the past 20 months, it's just like we're in an ongoing crisis, and you want to operate strategically. And I think for NIF, there's nothing more important than responding in a strategic way that can promise impact and real change because of the gravity of the issues that we're trying to respond to. And NIF always took pride in the fact that we had an emergency grants pool. We always had, if you know philanthropy and if you're in the area of contributing to social change, you know that you can allocate your funds to the field once or twice a year when you have a grant cycle, but then people come to you with urgent needs. And we always had an emergency grants pool. And I'm going to talk money for a second. Now,
I
later,
I hope you're going to explain what the emergency grants pool is to our attendees.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So we wanted to always have a bunch of money that's unallocated, and that you can come to us and say, I have an urgent need. I have to petition the Supreme Court because of something that happened that I couldn't anticipate, or we have to organize a protest and we need buses or speakers or loudspeakers or whatever it is that's necessary. And we always had that bunch of money unallocated because we wanted to offer the field, and not to say, oh, we love what you're coming with, but come back next year. And it was a tiny pot of money, and we used to give very small grants out of it. Like, I think the highest we'd give is $3,000 US. In the past few years, when I was a young grants officer, it was around $70,000 US a year. In the past year, we've given between $4 to $5 million in emergency grants. And we've raised the sum of money of an emergency gift to $100,000 that could get approved within 24 hours. So that goes to show that we have really changed the way we operate to responding to immediate needs, to be as agile as we can to respond to needs on the ground. But we've also fallen in love with the notion of emergency response. I will say something here that speaks to the way we operate internally. And we are challenging ourselves constantly. And I've just taken a lot of time to talk about how emergency response is so important. But at this rate of emergencies, you have to think of the emergency as a constant. And as the field that you're playing in. There's always going to be, if you're in tennis or, I don't know, racquetball, there's always going to be balls thrown at you, and you have to respond tuck, 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 all the time. And you can't just say, okay, here's more money from my pool, here's more money from that emergency pool. And the way we responded to the attack in Iran and to the last 12 days, and very much also to the last 20 months since October 7th, is through core work. And when you think of your core work in a strategic way, you find that it's there to answer emergency. And I think later Sana can explain more about the way that comes into life, especially in the Palestinian Israeli communities, the different Palestinian communities in Israel, because you can always buy more mobile shelters, because the state isn't buying mobile shelters in the unrecognized villages. But if you really want to solve the problems, you make sure that someone is responsible for the next emergency already. And I think what we are thinking now is, how do we respond to an emergency? Through core planned work. How do you respond to the unplanned? Through what you planned in advance. And I'll end by saying that the year before October 7th, we were heavily invested in responding to the judicial overhaul and to the threats on Israeli democracy, and the general feeling of the past decade and a half that Israel is experiencing a democratic backsliding. Maybe we're not the only country in the world that's going through this, but that is the trend. And such kind of work you don't answer to with an emergency grant. You answer to with infrastructure work for Israeli civil society. And before October 7th, we have already founded the Civil Society Protection Hub, because we are the foundation that saw its role in the late 70s and early 80s, and since then in Israel, to create a pro-democratic progressive civil society that didn't exist. And then last year, or in the last 4 years or 5 years, to understand that we helped establish progressive civil society in Israel, but now we have to protect its ability to operate and to offer legal support and cyber support and PR support and all of the envelope that our activists and organizations need in order to operate. And then when an emergency hits you in the face, you know that you did good, because all of these structures are already in place. And they are the ones who are able to respond when a war breaks, and then when another war breaks inside that war that is still running. So all I'm saying is, in a very long way, that emergencies have to receive response through agility and through money that's unallocated, and then we can move within the 24 hours. But it is best answered to when it has an ongoing strategic component of the structures that need to be in place, and you augment the day after a war breaks or the week after a war breaks with the burning needs on top of the structures that you already put in place.
So I just want to make a comment as a new employee of the organization. In the week that I had joined, and maybe 24 hours after war broke out, I received an email from headquarters saying, "Hold tight. I hope everyone's doing okay. These are our 3 to 4 strategies for how we're going to help our citizens, how we're going to help people in Israel. Can you run through those few steps just before we go over to Sana to give us some more examples?"
Sure.
Because I felt relieved when I received that. I felt like the adults are in the room and they're looking after the people who need to be looked after.
Yeah, so I want to reference you. You always get my answer in a complicated way. I hope it's okay. I want to reference the film that we all love, I think, Mary Poppins. And if you've watched Mary Poppins, you know that in the beginning there is the Admiral Boom, and he lives next door, and he sets his watch every day with a cannon. And when he sets the cannon off, everybody in the bank's house runs and they say, "Posts, everyone." And when they say "posts, everyone," everybody knows what kind of precious piece of china they need to hold or picture on the wall. And for NIF, when the cannons are firing, we say "posts, everyone." And we know what our posts are. Our posts are, as you said, 3 to 4 pieces that we feel a commitment to. Number 1 is our commitment to the most vulnerable and transparent communities in Israel. And Sana will say more about that because she knows them from her life experience and from her professional experience. And many times none of us will be surprised. The communities that are most vulnerable, most underprivileged and transparent happen to be non-Jewish, happen to be Palestinian, of course, for a reason. So our commitment is to vulnerable Jewish communities and vulnerable Palestinian communities in Israel, and Sana will say more later. Second, as I mentioned, we are concerned, not since the last 12 days, but for a long time now, with the state of Israeli democracy and with the issues of freedom of speech, freedom of protest, and currently new to us, freedom of movement. Can we fly out of this country? Who can fly out of this country? Can it happen on a Saturday? I'm talking to you as an Orthodox Israeli, but it has come to a point where, you know, the government of Israel is receiving permission or not from the chief rabbi whether or not El Al can fly with rescue flights on Shabbat. So, you know, that's how undemocratic, and that is such a tiny thing. I mean, we will talk of more instances of the shrinking democratic space, especially under the fog of war. And the two other things that I want to mention in short. One is to remind everyone and ourselves that there is still a war going on in Gaza, and that there is still carnage, bloodshed at a level that we're not even counting anymore, of people who are trying to get food and being shot. And we still have 50 hostages. A little less than half are presumably, hopefully, I pray, alive. So all eyes on Gaza, while all eyes are also on Iran, and all eyes on the West Bank, where people haven't had access to running water ever, and definitely not in the last summer months, and that we have to help organizations buy water during this time where we tend to forget because we're in a shelter, so you can't remember that someone else doesn't even have water. Or is being violently attacked by their neighbor settlers. So that's piece number 3, I would say. All eyes on Gaza, all eyes on the occupied territories. And finally, what sounds funny to people sometimes, but gives me probably the most strength, is to continue to be fully committed in funding and in energy to finding a different vision and a different solution for this region. Because if we only continue to bring water to the villages in the Jordan Valley and to represent people who tweeted something and got arrested because they tweeted something in Arabic or in colors red, green, black, and white, then it must be, you know, something that's worth arresting them for. So, you know, we continue to put our finger in the dam, but we will continue to live on our sword. And if we don't present a different vision and an Israeli initiative, not an outside initiative, an Israeli initiative for a peace process internally and with our neighbors, then all the work we're doing on the areas that I just described is just perpetual how to manage the conflict and how to manage to survive with your head above water instead of looking for dry land.
Thanks, Shira. Sana, can you talk to us a little bit about what it's been like as a Palestinian Israeli to go through an Israel-Iran war? And also, if you can flesh out some examples of what Shira was talking about in terms of how our grantees were responding on the ground.
Yeah, of course. In continuation to what Shira has said, I think, and I'm not sure it's a positive thing, but it definitely serves us. I think NIF at this point has an expertise in responding in emergency times. I think this is one of the invaluable roles of NIF, and it is reflected in the way the organizations function at times of crisis. After October 7th, I think NIF has played a very significant role in that respect. And it starts long before that. It starts by providing long-term grants to each organization, and by establishing the organization's work as a basic infrastructure, then in networking the organization and connecting them, and NIF is doing the necessary work to do those connections. And three, during the emergency time itself, the way we respond and what we choose to support. And I think those are very two different important observations, that we do want to respond in emergency time, but we also want to look at the long term infrastructure building phase. We want those ecosystems to be ready to operate also the next time such an emergency occurs. So this time, when responding, it was much easier because after October 7th, we already established the ecosystem that was needed to operate in the next crisis. And the organization already knew what they can take upon themselves and which roles they can take upon themselves in order to act in the field. They already knew what they needed to do, how to use and utilize those emergency rooms that we have supported in the south and in the north in the Palestinian society, because as Shira said, those are the most vulnerable communities in Israel in times of crisis. And I think the number one issue that arose from the field is the lacking of shelters in Arab communities, both in the north and both in the south. In the south, it is much more harder because we're talking about 45 unrecognized villages, which are basically invisible to the state. And they lack any kind of infrastructure. We're talking about, we don't have roads, we don't have water supplies, we don't have electricity supplies. So when we're talking about an active war going on, the bombs do not recognize the unrecognized villages as populated areas, so the Iron Dome cannot protect them when a missile is shot towards them. And a lot of times the casualties are from the unrecognized villages because of that gap and a lack of willingness of the government to include them in the map of the Iron Dome. We have took a strategic decision that we will not be investing in building shelters. The lack is so big that we knew that we could not cover the needs in the ground. But what we did is gave funds to organizations that advocates and work with governmental offices in order to promote the building of shelters, or in order to promote alternative solutions in Palestinian society. We supported, like I said, 2 emergency rooms, one in the north, one in the south, and that included a really big range of activities. We're not a humanitarian organization, but we do support humanitarian need when it is needed in the ground. And I think that is the flexibility of NIF allows us to engage in many activities, in many shapes of support. So we did support some organization that wanted to distribute food, not the food itself, but the operation. Educational activities for children, as parents now were without any kind of frameworks for the children. Many parents have to go also to work and operate. So that is one. Hotline for emotional support. One of our women organizations, that is actually a project that we have supported previously, and that is a great example of how infrastructure is also served in times of crisis. So they establish a hotline for women, and then they utilize that hotline also to give support during times of war when it comes to rights, labor field rights during times of war, also hotlines for emotional support. We also invested in volunteers in the field to assist with both practical matters, but also advocacy data that needed to be collected. Emergency teams that are located in the villages for first aid to respond. For example, in the unrecognized villages, it is a lot of times ambulances have a hard time getting into the unrecognized villages because they don't know the roads, they don't know the points of access. So a lot of time the emergency ambulances that are operated by organization in the fields are the first one to respond and to give aid because they are from the community, they know the villages and they know how to access them. And those are really a few simple examples to the fields of intervention in each one of the emergency rooms that we have supported. I will give just a last example. One of our grantees, Ahoti in Tel Aviv, has advocated for the opening of the Tel Aviv Central Station that is for many years has been abandoned, but it is serving as a very useful bunker for now for mostly the refugee communities in Tel Aviv and South Tel Aviv. So in terms of advocacy, the organization has made a lot of difference on the ground in how it affects the accessibility of people to safe spaces and obtaining basic rights.
Thank you. And can I press you on my first question? Maybe I bundled it too quickly with the second question. What has been your experience, or perhaps the experience of your family, friends, as a Palestinian, Israeli, or a Bedouin through this period of time? I think it's a perspective that many of the people on this call may not get to hear often.
Well, I think that in times of war, inequalities emphasize even more. You can see how small things that we talk about in our daily routine are now being actually the core issue of how we deal with things. And all communities, I think, everyone who is not Jewish or born in here is, I think, feels in many terms silenced in terms of speaking or freedom of speech. That is one big thing, big issue that is accompanying us since October 7th and until this day. So I think the fear of talking against the war, the fear of speaking, the fear of having a position on, even the fear of being a Palestinian in a shelter that is not your home shelter. Hearing you speak Arabic in a public shelter, for example, and how the reaction can, and we have seen a very ugly phenomena during this war where workers from Thailand are being kicked out from shelters. Refugees from Ukraine are being kicked out from the shelters. Palestinians are being kicked out of the shelters. Times of war create panic among the communities, sure. But we need to continue and emphasize how to also obtain basic rights for invisible communities that cannot reach that kind of help. I mean, in my neighborhood, a lot of elderly people have came to our shelter in the building because they lack the shelter in their building, and many neighbors gathered in communal shelters in one of the buildings because they lack shelters. So I think the campaigns that we were trying to promote is the fact that it is actually illegal for you to kick people from the shelter. It is an offense according to the criminal law. That is one. So you cannot do that. And that, I think, also that was, I think, the role of the state, first of all, to do. But unfortunately, when there's a gaps, civil society organization come into that role and play a very significant role in promoting messages to the public. And that thing, I think, was the most one of the most valuable works of emphasizing those voices. And second, incitement in social media. A lot of ugly videos emerged after the death of 4 women in Tamra by a rocket, and a video of I'm guessing by the voices, the faces were not shown, by a group of young people were shouting that we hope your village will burn. So also advocating to no tolerance of incitement of violence in terms of war is something that we need to promote as well. But we also need to promote the equal enforcement of the law, because it is it sends a very mixed signals to the Palestinian population when the police decides to arrest some 20 people from al-Fahim because they were suspected to celebrate the war in the streets. And on the other hand, when incidents and incitement from Israelis towards Palestinian or other communities are not being enforced as such. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing and answering that question. Obviously, much more of a personal question than the other one. So thank you, and it's just horrifying to hear your answers. I am going to invite any of the participants who are joining us tonight to ask questions. I think you can type them in the question section. You might be able to put your hand up. You could try that as well, but I think typing is the way that we're working tonight. And while we wait for some of those questions to come through, I want to know how, and maybe this is back to Shira, how do people feel about this ceasefire? Does it really feel that it's going to hold on? What is the psyche at the moment amongst friends, family, colleagues? Are people talking about Gaza and hostages again? What's going through people's minds?
I think both Sana and I opened by saying that we're confused and perplexed. And when you feel like we feel like our leadership is situated in the White House in Washington, D.C. That everything important in Israel currently and in the region is being determined by someone that I did not elect and is not committed to me. I don't know about his commitment to his own citizens and residents, but and that is a weird feeling, because we feel like little like little tools in a game. There's a word for that in English, I forget what it is, that are being moved around by this crazy force that is totally outside our system and is now starting to decide about Netanyahu's trial, and is able to sit in Washington, D.C. and change the course of Air Force airplanes, and is able to wake up in the morning and tweet and to announce to the world and to us and to Iran and to anyone who cares to follow that there is a ceasefire. So we're treading in grounds that we have not yet ever encountered, where you learn about your life through Twitter and through that other network that I don't know. So that feels very, very weird. On the other hand, when things are this crazy, they can also maybe work. And we need to re-examine. It's been a time in general where we need to re-examine some of our basic assumptions about how peace happens in the world, or how peace conversations and treaties get signed or developed. And I will even say it was shocking for us to see that the first time there was a Palestinian Israeli party in the Israeli parliament was not through all of the work of the Jewish Arab Partnership, that through, you know, progressives and Jews and Arabs who have invested decades in shared living, and it was Netanyahu who kashered the way of Ra'am, of Abbas into the government. The first time we ever had that, even more than Yitzhak Rabin was able to do. So we are at a time where we have to re-examine some of our assumptions, understandings, the things we operated based on. And we think, I don't know what we think about this ceasefire. It took us by surprise the way it started, and it took us by surprise the way it ended. And we have no way of explaining to ourselves. I mean, of course, we have a way of explaining to ourselves. There's no reasonable way to explain to ourselves why the war in Gaza is still going on, why our children need to be killing and dying, and why their children need to be dying and dying, and why our hostages need to be, you know, forgotten, unless they can help in any way in a person's trial. So you don't know what to think. You don't know, you don't want to celebrate peace that is being brought on not through a deep process of coming together, understanding other people's narrative, and dealing with different narratives, and dealing with years of crisis and war. So, you know, it's like instant war, instant ceasefire, not driven by our leaders. And then another war that is longer than anybody ever anticipated. And as I said, carnage is beyond fathom. So we don't know how to feel, and we don't know who to trust. And we are yearning for local and international leadership that has some streak of reason and ideology and values. NIF is a lot about the values. And I'll end by saying, when people attack us from the right in Israel, another Hebrew class, they call us the Keren L'Israel Chadasha, the Foundation for a New Israel. And they think that by calling us the Foundation for a New Israel, instead of calling us the New Israel Fund, they have exposed the fact that we want a new Israel, and that we're trying with all of our investments in the field to create a new Israel. And they think that this is some sort of like they're taking the mask off of our faces and showing that NIF is about creating a new Israel. But you know what? Yes, we're honored to be named the Foundation for a New Israel, because we are interested in a new Israel. And I think we're interested in a new Israel where this kind of reality of wars is not the reality. And we're not naive about the fact that Israel needs security, but we want that to be done in an organized manner and not on Twitter. So yes, we are confused, and we are happy to be sleeping at night for the past few days, but we are concerned about deeper trends and deeper issues that can't be solved in a flick of a tweet.
Thanks, Shira. We have one question from the audience, and as we work out our technical issues, I might just allow Nahum to talk. You can unmute yourself and ask a question, Nahum. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Can you hear us? Maybe not. All right, while we wait to see if that can work, and just before we wrap up, is there anything that's giving you hope? Well, no, let me rephrase that. What is something that is giving you hope? Sana, I'll ask you to go first.
That is a very difficult question to seek for hope in this kind of times, but I think we I'm mostly, I am leaning on the work of our partners and the organizations in the field. I think if something gives me a bit of hope and in a possible change, that is the work of our grantees and the fact that they are there to respond and to assist and to support different communities in the field. And the fact that we are able to do that within NIF, I think brings me a lot of, I wouldn't say hope, but some positive prospect of a possible change. And that is more than anyone can ask for, I think, in this
Can I ask you, what's one grantee that you think the listeners on this call should follow directly after this call?
Oh, that is like choosing between your children.
I know your children.
That is a very difficult one, and I don't think that there is one organization. I think it is, like we have repeatedly said, it's an ecosystem that works in a synergy and in coordination. And after many years in the field, you can see beacons of change and some motion on the ground, but it's not one organization. One organization cannot do the work and cannot do the support that we are hoping for. So yeah, that was possibly an elegant way to avoid the question and choose a favorite one.
Shira, is there something that you want to add just before we wrap up?
Yes, thank you. So hope, as Sana said, is a big word for us right now. We're exhausted. It's exhausting. We haven't had a Saturday night to ourselves in years. We protest all the time because there's so much that we want to keep our voice out there. And so instead of hope, I can speak of action and determination. And that is keeping me going on, commitment, and I pray to God, and I hope that I have the energy personally and us as an organization and us as a camp to continue with persistence and to speak out what it is we think the new Israel should be like. And the two things that are giving me hope are November 1977 and March 1979. That is Anwar Sadat's visit to Jerusalem and the signing of the peace agreement with Egypt in 1979. And if that was possible post the Yom Kippur War in 1973, the timing is perfect. The war broke 50 years, October 7th war broke 50 years to the day to the Yom Kippur War. And if by 2027, we will have a Palestinian leader visiting the Knesset, and if by March 2029, we will have a signing on the grass in the White House, on the lawn in the White House, or anywhere you want. And I don't even care who those people signing will be, but if they represent our peoples, then then history can repeat itself not as a farce and not as a tragedy. And that happened in my lifetime. I was not alive during the Yom Kippur War, but I was a toddler in 1977 and in 1979. And I want to be able to feel that again. And that is what my focal point is. I don't think it's crazy naive. It might happen in our lifetime.
Amen. Ve'inshallah, that happens. Thank you so much for both of your work, and please send our deep gratitude to the rest of your teams and grantees as you see them.